Hi, I'm the Stick Figure Historian, and this is episode 37 of the England series. Today we'll be covering the Battle of Naseby. I hope you enjoy. It was a foggy morning in Naseby, this morning of the battle, so foggy that the two armies could hardly see each other. But as the sun rose higher, it burnt more and more through the mists, and the scene of the growing conflict grew more clear. King Charles had made the first strike, ordering his center forces to charge, the infantry. The footmen went bold and readily forward at the word, despite that they were so heavily outnumbered. The Parliament infantry, led by Philip Skippon, came out to meet them. And so fast did the two rush on, there was scarcely time to fire a gun. Only one volley was exchanged before they clashed together. Swords on swords, pikes on armor. The first din of battle. The fighting was close and hot. Even experienced soldiers look back with vivid memory on that struggle. Early on, a bullet struck Skippon's breastplate, boring straight through the metal and finding his ribs. He set his teeth against the pain and went on fighting. He refused to leave the field, for fear his men would lose heart and break apart. Afterwards, the cavalry grappled, Rupert against Henry Ireton. And just a quick note here, don't worry about keeping all these guys' names straight. I try to make them look as different from each other as I can, but it's kind of hard. Most of the famous guys of this time period look really similar. Longish hair, goatee beard, mustache. They all look the same. Whoa, wait, what was that? Go back a couple. Except for that guy, I guess. Okay. Anyway, that aside, you get the point. But back to the battle. Rupert's cavalry was marched against Ireton's cavalry. This, too, was hard fighting, but it was still nothing to match the fierce conflict of the infantry. Ireton was divided. His troops seemed to be holding their own well enough. Perhaps he should bring a division to help the plighted footmen. He decided to take his chances, and rode off with a little band to see what they could do. It was a brave mission, though sadly ill-fated. Ireton was knocked from his horse, wounded in the leg, and slashed across the face before he was finally taken prisoner by the royalists. In the meantime, the Roundhead cavalry were not holding their own so well anymore without their commander. Rupert felt the glory of victory once more as they began to flee before him. And truly, it was a wild flight. The Roundheads did not stop their horses until they came to Northampton, a full 13 miles away. Now, one would think Rupert had learned his lesson at Edgehill about leaving the field to chase after runaway enemy troops. But Rupert was not the type to learn much of anything. He repeated the error of 3 years ago, and let his troops fly away freely after their retreating foes, leaving Charles with absolutely no right wing. The king's left wing was a band called the Northern Horse, largely men who had escaped the defeat at Marston Moor. These had not yet joined the battle, though they yearned to help their fellows in the center. The only thing that held them back was the Roundhead's last cavalry wing. If they charged, the other was sure to descend and try to break their charge. Kind of like that dumb game when someone's chasing you, and you and the other guy end up on opposite sides of a table, and you're both waiting for each other to make a move. They waited a long while, but at last they could wait no longer. They surged forward to help their friends. It was a difficult charge, up a treacherous slope checkered with various scrub and rabbit holes. And just as they had feared, no sooner did they move than that remaining Roundhead cavalry wing moved to stop them, with Cromwell himself in the lead. The Northern horse never reached their footmen. Cromwell easily reversed Rupert's victory on this side of the field. And here we see Cromwell's better skill in command, for when the Northern horse were retreating, he sent only a small band of men after them. The rest he reined in and brought to the aid of the Roundhead infantry. Charles was distraught. His whole army, all his hopes and dreams of ever truly being king again, were falling to pieces before his eyes. Until now, he had remained behind with his reserve force, watching the scene unfold. In a wild rush of angry despair, he determined to join the fight and either redeem the victory or die fighting. The Earl of Carnwath caught a glint of spurs as the king goaded his horse, and realized in a flashing instant what the king was about to do. The earl reached out and snatched the bridle, pulling the horse's head aside. "No, my lord! Will you go upon your death in an instant?" Chaos followed. The king's lifeguards took the turning of his horse as a signal to retreat, and took off at a gallop, followed by the rest of the reserves. There was no hope of finishing the fight now. The king let go of the reins, and allowed the earl to lead him away off the field of Naseby, with, no doubt, more than one bitter tear shed against fate. It was at this crucial moment that Rupert arrived. He and his men had failed to get at the Roundhead baggage train, and since now they had nothing better to do, he had turned them back around to their former duty. They stopped their horses and watched in horror the scene of slaughter, over which the king's banner no longer fluttered. It was too late. They debated making a charge, but when they saw that Fairfax was reforming and making for a fresh attack, their nerve was shaken, and they made hasty retreat. The new model army emerged victorious from their first major battle. Digby's earlier fears had been well grounded, as had Rupert's. The day was lost. But before we close, lest you wonder what had become of poor Ireton, the wounded cavalry commander had been rescued by his friends, and lived on to see another day of fighting. The brave Skippon also recovered from his wound, and continued in his well-earned command of the infantry.